All right, let's get started. A big welcome to each of you. I hope that you and your families and friends are safe and healthy. The coalition team is here and we're typically distributed, so absolutely in business, and we'll get started. This is being recorded so that we will send a link to the recording to you, and you're welcome to share it with your colleagues thereafter. Today's webinar is going to be talking about email phishing. And we're going to get into a little detail about funds transfer fraud, which is basically somebody trying to convince you to send money to the wrong place. It's pretty common. And my name is John Roberts. I'm the head of product at Coalition. And my role here today is to welcome you and to really introduce you to the experts who are going to be talking through this topic. Leanne Nicola and Josh Smith are part of Coalition Incident Response. They're the team that goes to work when you have a problem, and often before you have a problem. We're absolutely here to help policyholders with questions before things go wrong, because that's obviously the easiest time. But importantly, they have experience with hundreds of these incidents. We see 5 to 10 phishing cases a week, and of all different flavors. So we're going to dive into that. Thank you, all of you are current policyholders, and we appreciate your trust in us. And want to reinforce that we're here both with insurance, the financial resilience, and honestly, the expertise. When something goes wrong, we're your cyber 911. And in the event of a claim or an incident, we want to help, because in cyber insurance and cybersecurity incidents, the faster you act, often the less damage there is to your business and just to getting back on your feet as an organization. As you can see here, we are the fastest growing provider of cyber insurance. That's thanks to you and the broker partners we work with, and the financial backstop behind us, some of the largest companies in the world. So with that aside, here's the agenda. And we've covered the welcome. We're going to get into talking about phishing. Then, interesting, we're going to demo a phishing attack, and that's the part that really hits home for me. Then we're going to talk about the tactics to prevent phishing from compromising your business. And these are useful tactics, certainly organizationally, but also personally. And we'll call attention to some of the things that Coalition offers, including some really helpful security awareness training that is included for all policyholders, and it's free for the first 15 employees. Optional, but certainly all things are at your disposal. And certainly we want questions. We'll do most of the questions at the end, but look forward to you raising your hand using the Zoom controls. I know we're all actually getting much better every day with different remote tools. If you haven't used that part of Zoom before, look for it. I think it's at the bottom in most platforms. It can be at the top, but the raise your hand or the Q&A. And with that, my role here is to sort of make sure I can help gather the questions and hand off to the expert. So Leanne, would you take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, John. Okay, so with that, we're going to go into a little bit of a background before we delve into some of the examples. So we're going to start with the what for phishing. So a phishing campaign, as we like to call them, it's an email scam that's created by malicious actors or an attack group that is used to steal personal information from an individual or a company. The phishing, when we actually say phishing, we mean the attempt made by the malicious actor to retrieve sensitive information. This could pretty much include anything that the malicious actor believes is valuable. Some examples of this would be passwords, credit card information, bank information, etc. And in order to obtain this information, the attackers often disguise themselves as a trustworthy sender. And what I mean by that, in many cases, we see the attacker obtaining credentials for somebody with a lower, less less privilege in the environment. For example, if they're able to obtain the username and password for, say, a secretary, and then as the secretary, they pose, to be that person and send an email to the CFO with the thought that they will obtain financial information to steal, the CFO believes that that's a trustworthy sender. So that's how a lot of phishing attacks start. People don't even question them because they believe the sender is legitimate. Now we'll get into the when. The term phishing was created in the early to mid 1990s when attackers first started stealing AOL username and passwords. It's kind of when the term was coined. The quote states that, by analogy with the sport of angling, these internet scammers were using email lures, sending out hooks to fish for passwords and financial data from the sea of internet users. Getting into the where, pretty much phishing is found with anybody with an internet connection and an email account. All industries, regardless of gender, job, location, financial worth. Attackers just use the first piece of stolen information to help further the spread of data collection until they're able to steal, something that usually leads to a monetary gain. How? So we're going to spend a lot of time kind of going over the how here, along with the demo, just showing you guys exactly kind of what happens on the back end. So some common tactics that the malicious actors ask the user to log in as. So often we see web pages that are pointing to Gmail or Dropbox, Office, SharePoint, PayPal, Amazon. To the end user, these login web pages appear legitimate, but these are what the attackers actually spin up and create in order to steal the credentials on the back end. We're going to show you what this looks like during the demo. So if you have any questions on that, just hang on. Down at the bottom, we state that additionally, some attackers send an email with malicious attachments. Often these contain banking Trojans. Banking Trojans are kind of a topic in and of itself, but this is another way that phishing schemes are used, because as soon as the banking Trojan attachment is opened, something is installed on the system which can harvest credentials locally. And what I mean by that is anybody who's logged into that system where the banking Trojan is open, their username and password is stored in what's called a hash file. And as soon as the banking Trojan runs on the system, it now has access to that hash file, which means from an end user perspective, as soon as they open up that attachment and the banking Trojan starts running, it doesn't appear that anything's going wrong. But on the back end, the attacker is now stealing username and passwords to anybody that's ever logged into the system. So they're quite dangerous. This is a timeline of kind of a high-level phishing attack. So it starts with a phishing email. The attacker then steals credentials. They log into the email account with the stolen credentials. Various things are done in stage 4. Often we see attackers setting up rules. So they'll set up different rules within the mailbox to delete specific messages or send specific messages to folders so that the legitimate user of the mailbox does not notice any suspicious activity. Often they perform searches looking for sensitive data to see what type of information is stored within the user mailbox and see if they could profit off of that. And like I stated previously, a lot of times they use mailboxes as what we call a pivot mailbox to further the spread. So the last kind of step in a phishing scheme is intercepting the email communications. And what I mean by that is actually providing updated banking information so that the end user believes that it's a legitimate change to a bank account or a direction on where to send the wire. Or they use the email to pivot and further the spread to get additional credentials until they're able to pose as that person where they can get the monetary gain.
This slide is an example of a common phishing email tactic used by attackers. There's 2 things you as a user have to watch out for here. The attacker may be sending you an actual Dropbox page, but the link The link or file hosted on that Dropbox page may lead you to a phishing page. The second scenario is the attacker is not at all sending you to Dropbox. They're just embedding a phishing URL in the View Document Now button.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll explain this a little bit further in the demo. But like Josh just stated, in this example right here, it says, hello, Wilson shared a document with you. If you've ever received an email from Dropbox, this is what they more or less look like. So in this case, the end user believes it's a receipt. They think they're opening a PDF. As soon as they click View Document Now, it brings you to a Dropbox site, which you believe is Dropbox, but it's really just the front end of Dropbox. You enter your username, you enter your password, nothing happens, so you X out of it and go along with your day. And on the back end, the malicious actor has now harvested your credentials and has access to your legitimate Dropbox account. So it's very dangerous.
Pictured on this slide is Imkcz. This is a free email mailing service commonly used for spoofing emails. We've commonly seen attackers use this to send phishing emails as well as inject themselves in email conversation. This slide shows how easy it is for an attacker to start their phishing campaign. It's often stressed, and we also believe this, that attackers that conduct these phishing campaigns are not these crazy hackers, but it's also important to realize how much social engineering and recon they're doing on the back end to identify which users deal with financial related information.
Absolutely. And when we say the word recon, that's short for reconnaissance. And what we mean by that is all it takes is a relatively quick Google search or a scan through LinkedIn to be able to find who the important players are within a company, right? So if you give us 10 to 15 minutes, I'm sure we could find the CEO, the CFO, the CTO. We could probably get their email account. We could probably get their phone number. We can probably send them an email that they'll reply to. So then we have their email signature. Gathering all of that information is, even though that is public, it's scary because all the malicious actor needs to know is who. And then they utilize something like this, which is exactly like Josh explained. It's an email mailer where you could set the from name to be whoever you want. So you could appear to be whoever you want. And most, domains accept this kind of email. So here's an example, Josh, if you want to get into kind of what's going on the screen.
Yeah, so in the top example picture, an attacker is sending an email pretending to be John Ford from General Motors, but the attacker doesn't actually have access to John Ford's inbox. So they set the reply email to an email that they own themselves, which is just some made up thing in this. If an SPF record was in place on the generalmotors.com domain, then the attacker would not be able to send an email on behalf of General Motors.
So we'll get into SPF and DMARC and DKIM, but just to touch on them here, those are basically email protocols that you set up within your email environment to not allowed spoofing. So in this case, this is a filled out version of the page we just showed you. So just like Josh said, I'm just reiterating here, but we state that it's from John Ford, and we state that the email is from johnford@generalmotors.com. Anybody could do this with any domain if the spoofing records are not in place to prevent this. So like Josh stated, unless you're clicking reply to and noticing that jford@geeurejd.com email, you believe from the recipient that you're speaking to jford@generalmotors.com. So it's extremely dangerous. Now we're going to switch over to a demo. Okay, excellent. So this is, Josh, can you see the PowerShell screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh is going to kind of walk through what's going on here. This appears to be rather technical just because we used the back end tools to create the demo, just because it's a little bit easier for us. But we've done nothing in this case except create a little PowerShell script that shows an email from, to, and a subject. So Josh, I'll click play and you can kind of talk through.
Yeah, so a little background. I just created a PowerShell script. It took me a few minutes. Signed up for a free SendGrid account, which anyone can do. SendGrid is a legitimate marketing tool, marketing mailing tool, I should say, used by big name companies daily. Another example of SendGrid would be something like MailChimp. This is important because a lot of times domain reputation is used for the mail server to tell if the email is spam, along with a few other key factors, but that's a big one. Microsoft trusts emails from SendGrid because it is so commonly used. So oftentimes it's easy for attackers to use SendGrid to get their phishing emails across to the end user.
Exactly. So I'm just kind of reiterating everything you're saying, Josh, but just to kind of state the importance of that. These are accepted email programs because a lot of big name companies use them for marketing. So that's really scary that attackers have found out, what legitimate programs are being utilized in the field, and now they're exploiting them. So there's really no way to block these because they are used so often for email marketing. So in this case, like Josh said, as you can see on the right hand, about 3/4 of the way down, the SMTP server is SendGrid, which is an accepted server because we know that it's highly utilized in the field. And so as soon as Josh clicks play on the PowerShell script, he just needed to put credentials in, and then I'll move forward.
Yeah, and so in this PowerShell script, we're sending a fake email from accounts payable at uchealth.com to a test Microsoft account that Coalition owns. But we don't actually own that accounts payable at UC Health. We're just able to send as that because we're using SendGrid and Microsoft trusts it.
Okay, so this is a screen. This is the email actually hitting the inbox. Josh, if you want to kind of talk through what's going on here.
Yeah, so the email hits the inbox, and from here, the attacker or the user would get a SendGrid link. Oftentimes, email security servers or email filters are not going to be picking up on SendGrid links, but even if they are, once that SendGrid, past that SendGrid link is a SharePoint link, so that's not going to be picked up as malicious either.
And just to kind of jump in here for a sec, we copied and pasted the actual SendGrid link into this email just because this took us 9 minutes to get together. So extremely quick and easy to do. And we have no credentials. We have nothing in this scenario here. We just made up this UC Health. We got it to pass through to our test account, which is Josh at the coalition with the zero.com. We could have made this link beautiful, right? We could have embedded it to a photo, into a picture. We could have put icons in here. We could have created a really nice signature. We could have made this look as legitimate as possible. Just for sake of time, we just copied it and pasted just to show kind of the mechanics of what's going on here. But a lot of attackers do spend a lot of time beautifying their phishing emails because they want them to get through and they want people to think they're legitimate.
So when the user clicks that link, they're going to be brought to a SharePoint. And oftentimes when you think of SharePoint, that's owned by Microsoft. It shouldn't contain anything malicious, but we have a malicious domain hosted in there. And from there, you get led to a phishing page. So
in this case, you would notice, this appears to be relatively legitimate. This looks like the Microsoft Office login page. We've seen attackers copy and paste the icons for the actual client that they're dealing with. So where it says Microsoft, if you have a company, domain and you have an icon there instead of Microsoft, we've seen attackers just go to, it's very easy to find the external Office domain that you utilize internally and copy out that picture and put it there, which just furthers the legitimacy. There are kind of two things here that can tell you that this is a phishing email. The first one is reviewing the URL. So if you notice at the top, it's elwaleedpharmacies.com. So that has nothing to do with Office. So that's very suspicious. And Josh, if you want to talk about the links.
Yeah, and so commonly on these phishing pages, when you click forgot my password, that's going to bring you nowhere. And sign in with a different Microsoft account will bring you nowhere. On a real Microsoft page, that will bring you somewhere. So that's important to look out for.
Exactly. So often, like I stated before, a lot of these attackers will go the extra mile, but in the cases where they don't, clicking those will just bring you nowhere because they're not setting up those pages. So it's laziness, just because, most people don't click forgot my password or sign in with a different account, especially when they're trying to access a PDF or something they believe is just an attachment. But that is a good checker.
So in the demo, the password was entered and it wasn't correct. So it actually verifies, the phishing site actually verifies with Microsoft that these credentials are correct. And if they're not, it'll actually give you the page returned saying they're not correct.
So attackers don't, and I hate to say this bluntly, but they feel like they don't want their time wasted. So when they're doing these in mass, they don't want to, it's not worth their time and effort to be obtaining credentials that are not legitimate. So like Josh just stated, they send the username and email to the Microsoft server to be able to hit it to see, okay, these are actual credentials. This is an actual Microsoft email. The email was legitimate. We obviously, this was made up, so we didn't know the password. But if I was the end user and I entered my legitimate password, the screen would just show nothing. You would keep clicking sign in and nothing would happen, and you would probably exit out and go upon your day. And on the back end, the attacker is harvesting the credentials. So they're hosting a server where they can now receive that information, and now they have your office.com password. So relatively simple. Josh, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, just that there's scripts being run on the back end of the site that will collect that data, send the request to Microsoft and that kind of stuff. You won't even see it.
Exactly. Okay.
So this slide is another example of a common tactic used by attackers where they're just, DocuSign is something that somebody uses most likely every day. Users commonly use that, and they're just sending you something that looks like DocuSign, something you would have to view, and then they either take you there or they take you to DocuSign where something is being hosted legitimately. This slide is an example of a wire transfer request. A lot of times attackers will pose as the CEO or pose as somebody else in the company that needs a wire request sent to an account, and they'll give you an account. That's why it's so important that people use two-factor in relation to wire transfers. Just picking up the phone and calling this person to make sure this is what they actually sent you is a great way to make sure that you're getting an email from somebody you know is the correct person.
Absolutely. And you guys might look at this and just be like, I would never fall for this. Please process a wire payment in the amount of $250,000. This is the code, do it immediately, follow these instructions. We can't stress enough how often we see wire transfers, fraudulent wire transfers that actually get paid that look exactly like this. So you may believe that this is, relatively silly or, nobody would fall for this, but it's amazing, when people don't work in the same office or they're extremely busy or the CEO sends emails like this previously, that when they see something like this, they don't even skip a beat. They just move forward, don't question it. And then they wait till, the next day or 2 days later when they either see the person, the CEO, and follow up with him about the wire, or the receiving party did not receive. And that's kind of how they backtrack, like, okay, something here was wrong. So we're going to move on to the why. Pretty straightforward. I mean, in almost all cases, the reason behind everything is financial gain. These are some of the search terms that we see the attackers searching once they're inside a mailbox, which just further our belief that it's all about money. Often they look for W-2, invoice, wire transfer, payment, CFO, credit card. I'd say the most popular one in almost every single case where we see a business email compromise where it's a FTF is wire transfer. It's as soon as they log in, that's something that they search. So here's a little bit kind of a background. So in a typical fund transfer fraud case, the attacker logs in, they search the mailbox, they try to obtain information about an invoice that's unpaid. That way they could, come right in and hop right in and reroute the money. Once they have the details, the malicious actor usually sets up a rule so that the legitimate mailbox owner doesn't notice any of the fraudulent activities. So sometimes they delete the responses from specific people, or they set up a forwarding rule to forward to another folder so that the legitimate user does not see them, but they're not fully deleted out of the mailbox. The attacker then provides the recipient with new wire instructions stating something like, you know, our bank account information was updated, or we just had to change this due to security concerns. Here is the new instructions attached. Please move forward. We've also seen malicious actors go as far as calling the numbers that they found in an email signature in order to confirm the wire was legitimate. And that the wire should be sent to the updated banking information. And that's why it's extremely important. We call internally known good. And what that means is having known good, you know, account information on file, whether that's a cell phone number or a direct line or a personal email. Somebody who handles these financial transactions should have a number that they've spoken to the person on previously and not something in their signature. We've seen attackers change an email signature number by one number, or reroute phone calls, which is even scarier. So there really would be no way in that case for the legitimate user to ever know something was wrong. This is a picture of illegitimate logins for a recent case that we just had. So in the bottom, we'll go from bottom to top. So the first login that took place on February 8th was from a VPN, which is a virtual private network. Attackers often utilize these to kind of hide their tracks. So they pretended that they were in Georgia, connecting on a VPN from there through Mozilla, which basically just means it's a web login. So they opened up a web browser, went to office.com, and connected to the user account illegitimately. Usually the login activity mirrors what you see on the screen. So we see a login on the 8th, then a few days later, we see another, and then a day later, another, and then a day later of multiple. Usually on the first login, we believe they're just testing their credentials. So to confirm they have access. On the second login, we believe often they're performing searches. So kind of seeing what's in the mailbox, what they can exploit. And then the third and the last login, they really spend a lot of time in the mailbox just studying the communications and how the user talks, maybe gathering some email signatures, seeing when the right time to jump in is. So it's pretty rare that it's one login and one login only. Usually it's various logins over anywhere from 1 day to a few weeks. So here's some rules that we recently found in a funds transfer fraud, so an FTF case, which is really a social engineering term. In this case, there was a forwarding rule that if the body of the message contained the words wire, account, payment, invoice, funds transfer, or ACH, forward it to a .ru email account and stop processing any other rules. So what that's saying is that's a Russian email address, not in any way associated with the client. So if there's any emails that have to do with pretty much anything relating to payment, forward it to them. So that's the account that the malicious actor is monitoring externally, and then don't do anything further. So the attacker pretty much just has to sit on their email, which is this asdjgla@mailru.com, wait to get an email that has anything about payment, and then they know to hop back in and sign back in, and kind of now's the time. The second one is the same thing. So any messages from support, which is an alert, it just says to forward and stop processing messages. And a good example of kind of what we mean by that alert is right here. So often Office 365 has these, and Josh, these are set up by default, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. But unfortunately, by default, the severity is also low, which is questionable.
So by default, if you have an Office 365 environment and somebody creates a forwarding rule, the administrator account within your domain will receive this alert, which attackers clearly know. And a lot of times rules are set up to hide the alerting of the rules, which, you know, kind of seems backwards, but all you need to do is miss one of them, or the attacker log into your mailbox and delete that one, and then you'll never get them again. So it's very important to kind of monitor rules and alerts within the environment. And like Josh said, the severity on it is low. People get, hundreds, if not thousands of emails a week in some cases. And if they're getting low alerts from Microsoft, this might just go completely ignored. So here is an example of another funds transfer fraud email communications that we handled recently. So in this case, down at the bottom, the legitimate user is named Den. You can tell that this my account ll@email.cz is an illegitimate email. That's not the user's actual email. But Cheyenne, in this case, who was handling the funds, did not notice that that was an incorrect email. She just saw the name, which was Den, thought it was legitimate. This user provided updated information for their payroll. The user who was handling all the payroll, Cheyenne in this matter, responded, said, no problem, change confirmed. This will be effective for this payroll. Handful of days later, this person did not get paid. He saw Cheyenne in the office, went over to her and communicated with her, why didn't I get my paycheck? They went through the emails, realized it was a phishing email, tried to kind of claw back the money, and it's a whole process at that point. I also just want to state that attackers know what is relevant, right? So they know exactly what to send phishing emails on. There is a wave of phishing emails coming out right now about coronavirus. So we've seen various phishing emails that are either have attachments that contain banking trojans or links in them to obtain credentials stating, here's what the CDC recommends, or please follow up with your employees by clicking here, or here is a, 10 greatest facts about coronavirus. We've seen hundreds of them, hundreds of new domains being registered, just various phishing campaigns because they know that right now that is the most relevant thing on everybody's mind. So it really just takes a lot of diligence and double checking and internal communication. So we're going to just talk a little bit about prevention. Josh, you want to go over this slide?
Yeah, sure. So definitely prevent strong email authentication protocols, DMARC, SPF, and DKIM. These can be set up on the domain, and they just help ensure that malicious emails do not reach the inbox of a user. You also want to block spam emails and spam domains as they're received. So adding them to a blacklist of some sort is helpful. Deploy browser protection so users cannot visit illegitimate websites. There's common browser protection like DNS.
OpenDNS.
OpenDNS, exactly. Keep all systems and software up to date. Apply multi-factor authentication, MFA, or also known as two-factor, on all accounts that support it. Microsoft recently released a statement saying that two-factor has helped prevent 99% of compromised accounts.
And this is John. Let me just chime in that we have help articles about all of these topics at help.coalitioninc.com, and happy to answer individual questions both here in the webinar at the end, and then also at any time, help@coalitioninc.com, because we'd like to make sure that we're here to provide advice before there's a problem.
Absolutely. And if you speak to anyone at Coalition, I think you're just going to hear MFA or multi-factor authentication over and over, because that would stop so many of our insured's issues. Just that extra layer of MFA, like Josh said, Microsoft itself, who sees this more than anybody, 99.9% of incidents wouldn't be unable to be exploitable if MFA was enabled. So that's a very high statistic, which we highly recommend all users should be on.
And it's free.
Absolutely, and extremely easy to set up, which Josh and I have plenty of experience. So like John said, if you guys have any questions after visiting the help articles, or you want to discuss further, we are absolutely available. So just moving on to further preventative actions, we advise implementing an email hygiene service. So FireEye ETP is an external tool. FireEye is its own company. They've won kind of the past 5 or 6 years, kind of the best in the business for email hygiene. So basically it's a filter service to put on your email so that spoofed emails and phishing emails never reach the inbox. Microsoft ATP is Advanced Threat Protection. That's the Microsoft tool. A little bit less robust, but absolutely does work, and it comes with the Microsoft suite. Implement email forwarding blocks or alerts. So setting up the alerting to go to multiple users, or deem them as high alerts, or just completely block email forwarding. So don't allow users to forward their email externally from the domain. We advise a lot of users this, because as soon as an attacker logs in and attempts to set up an external email, not only can they not, but then you get the rule that somebody's in there and messing around with something. So that's a really good preventative step. Third point may be the most important, just because attackers are constantly finding new ways around everything. It's just a constant back and forth game with reactive and proactive security. Training all employees on email phishing. So really just there's hundreds of free training out there. The curricula that we have is an excellent resource. So Coalition provides it on the policyholder dashboard. It's free for up to 15 employees, and it's discounted for any additional. We highly recommend implementing that and kind of discussing that with your companies. And then the last point we want to make is training employees who handle financial transactions to follow up changes that are made in an email with a phone call to a known good number. So I know we touched on that a little bit, but really can't state enough to have their direct line and they make a change via email, just pick up the phone and confirm that it was them. You hear their voice, you know who they are. That way there's really no way for an attacker to exploit that kind of communication. And this is the slide from our policyholder dashboard, just showing the curricula training. So it's called security awareness training. It's really interactive, and I think it would really shock a lot of people how many people internally could fall for phishing. So we absolutely recommend it.
Yeah. Thank you, Leanne and Josh. This is John Roberts again. I've had a couple questions, and I'm going to ask those in a moment, but I just want to encourage you to raise your hand, or otherwise ask in the Zoom chat, and we'll make sure we address it. The one that I heard already was, if I fear I've been phished, like how should I communicate? Because the attacker is in my email box.
Sure, absolutely. And we face that challenge daily, because if there's an ongoing compromise, there's really no way for us to talk securely. So we suggest everything being done over the phone, which is why it's really important to have those phone numbers and those communications set up prior to being in that situation. So making sure that you have a technical support line. So somebody, whether it's internal IT or external to your organization, that their phone number to, their name, and when something's going on, you can call them. Same with Coalition, obviously picking up the phone and just calling us to kind of advise what's going on, and then we could call you directly, whether there's lawyers involved, just kind of getting everybody on the same page with phone call communication. Often in these cases, we set up a reoccurring meeting, which we'll just touch base on the phone every morning, just so that we don't, go off of anything via email. Various clients have requested things in writing, so they'll go to a personal email account, and we'll communicate with their personal email rather than their business email, just until everything is secured.
Great. And the other one was like, as we saw in the demo, the Office 365, but is Office 365 safer than alternatives?
Yes. So the two main ones we see are Gmail and Office 365. The reason I immediately say yes, just because all of the controls that Microsoft implements. Google does a pretty good job, so there really is a lot of learning you could set up, but the configuration in Microsoft by default is pretty good. And they have just so many filters you could apply and configurations you could change, and so much of it is free and just straightforward. So we usually advise clients to go to Office 365 if they have not. Gmail is, fine, totally fine. And there are separate configurations and filters they can implement on that end. But really anything external to that is going to be lacking, just because they're not one of the main supported industry standard email platforms. So the filtering and configurations are pretty much lacking on any other email tenant you may have.
Got it. I'm going to post, we had mentioned SPF, DKIM, DMARC. We all recognize that those are not acronyms that roll off the tongue, and that if you have never set up an email server, which I certainly have never done, they're not obvious topics. But we have a lot of articles. I posted some in the chat that either you, if you're managing email for your company, or your technical colleagues, or if you work with an outside firm, these are very common metrics. They do not take very long. It just takes knowing where to make the change, which honestly is often the hardest part, but I want to encourage that. Those are the 2 questions I've had so far. If you have a question, please raise your hand using the, or drop it in the chat on Zoom. As we've mentioned, this has been recorded, and we will send a link to the recording to you, and happy to share it with other colleagues. I would encourage you to take advantage of the different resources in the Coalition Policyholder Dashboard. We've mentioned security awareness training. There are other opportunities. We are also understanding that you don't need to log in to get benefits. So we are always monitoring our policyholders, and we reach out when we see a new risk. We've done that at different times for individuals with remote desktop protocol. We have done this when we've seen large breaches that include an employee's organization. And there's nothing any of us can do about being involved in those, except that, to tie back to what Leanne and Josh were demonstrating, when you can see the exact email or multiple emails within an organization, it just makes it that much easier to start a phishing campaign. Good. There's a question from one of our attendees can Coalition provide a phishing test email service for my company? The answer is yes. Perhaps that wasn't clear, and my apology. The curricula security awareness training includes phishing test emails. So it is both sort of training in how to recognize things, sort of a fun, modular version of what we've just gone through, but with a bit more polish, a little more pizzazz, and also different scenarios. But it also includes the opportunity for the company admin to do test emails. Thank you for that question. If there are no others, Leanne, if you go to the last slide, just to sort of reinforce how we are, always here. help@coalition.com for any time. We're here before, during, and after an incident. And also, we have 24/7 toll-free phone number, 1-833-866-1337. And we, certainly the faster anyone acts when recovering from an incident, the less damage that is done. You get the smart folks like Leanne and Josh and their teammates immediately working on your behalf. And that is very helpful. With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you very much for your time. And certainly, again, thank you for being Coalition policyholders.